Fallout from the Jeffrey Epstein files has now reached one of the largest investment banks in the world, Goldman Sachs. The bank's chief legal officer, Kathy Ruemmler, now says she is resigning. In recent weeks, she has weathered numerous stories examining her relationship with Epstein over the years. Ruemmler is a former White House counsel to President Obama. She and those around her have insisted that her relationship with Epstein, it was a professional relationship through and ended. A spokesperson for Ruemmler declined to answer some of the detailed questions sent to them from CNN, but said that Ruemmler said this, has done nothing wrong, has nothing to hide, nothing in the record suggests otherwise, adding that Ruemmler has been clear and consistent from the outset. She knew him through her work as a criminal defense attorney, shared a client with him, received referrals from him, and was friendly in that professional context. After her announcement, her resignation announcement, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, David Solomon, told CNN this. Throughout her tenure, Kathy has been an extraordinary general counsel, and we are grateful for her contributions. He went on to say, I accepted her resignation, and I respect her decision.
An exclusive K-File report uncovering new details about top Goldman Sachs executive and former Obama White House counsel Kathy Ruemmler's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. A review of hundreds of emails between Epstein and Ruemmler, a woman he once called his, quote, great defender, shows discussions about Epstein's legal and reputational troubles, as well as more personal communications, like plans for a proposed trip to Epstein's island and gifts he'd given her. Ruemmler has repeatedly said she regrets ever knowing Epstein and that she had, quote, no knowledge of any new or ongoing unlawful activity on his part. That's her quote. Out front now, K-File's Andrew Kaczynski, who has been breaking all of this reporting. So, Andrew, what have you found?
Well, Aaron, these new messages reveal even more details about Kathy Ruemmler's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, a relationship that, according to these emails, both of them described as a friendship. There are hundreds of email exchanges between the two. Some of the messages, they discussed Epstein's legal battles and reputational problems after his 2008 conviction. Other communications between the two include plans for a proposed trip to Epstein's island and responses to gifts he'd given Ruemmler. For instance, she wrote, quote, totally tricked out by Uncle Jeffrey today. Jeffrey boots, handbag, and watch. Now, in some of these back and forth messages, Ruemmler discussed personal matters in her life. She expressed gratitude for their, quote, friendship, sometimes concluded her messages to Epstein with the sign-off XO and XOXO. There's one example we found where Ruemmler sent Epstein a message on his 62nd birthday in 2015 to wish him well, writing, I hope you enjoy the day with your one true love, adding a smiley face. Epstein replied with a raunchy note and an apparent reference to masturbation, writing, they say men usually give a name to their penis as it would be inappropriate to make love to a total stranger. Now, after receiving Epstein's racy reply, Ruemmler responded, hard to believe there is still an open question about whether men are the inferior gender.
Okay. So what has Ruemmler said about this message?
Well, Aaron, we asked them about that, and they referred this exchange. Ruemmler and her communications team referred CNN's questions about this to her attorney, Tom Clare, and this is what he told us. He said, quote, the fact is Ms. Ruemmler does not make any statement about Epstein's penis. She does not reference it. She does not joke about it. She does not banter with Epstein about it. She does not accede to Epstein's unsolicited, gratuitous remarks about men and their penises, nothing. Her participation in the entire exchange I think he meant is limited to wishing Epstein a happy birthday, ridiculing Epstein for the remark, and exiting the exchange.
Okay, so the files also reveal new details about how Ruemmler advised Epstein regarding some of his legal and reputational problems. So what more can you tell us about that tonight?
Well, yeah, that's right, Aaron. In one exchange from February 2015, Ruemmler addressed a Crimes Victims' Rights Act lawsuit brought by Epstein's accusers. That's the lawsuit which sought to reopen his so-called sweetheart plea deal from 2008. Ruemmler wrote to Epstein, I told you that the CVRA case is about money, and in another message after inquiring about which lawyer was handling the case, Ruemmler wrote, victims' rights, my ass. In another message from July 2015, Ruemmler forwarded Epstein a New York Times story which featured critics of sex offender registries like the one Epstein had been listed on for years by then. Did you see the New York Times story, Ray, misapplication of sex offender registry? Thinking about whether there is an opportunity there, Ruemmler wrote. Now, a spokesperson for Ruemmler told CNN in a statement that Epstein, quote, sought informal advice and she provided feedback based on her understanding at the time without any formal involvement.
Okay. Well, you also found emails that show Rumler responding to an invitation from Epstein to visit that infamous private Caribbean island, right?
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. According to the newly released files, Rumler at one point inquired about taking a, quote, day trip to Epstein's private island. In a January 16, 2017 email that you can see right here, Epstein asked if he could have a plane pick her up in St. Lucia to fly her to, quote, the island. Rumler replied asking, can we take a day trip to the island on Saturday, or is it too far? Emails then show a week later Epstein appearing to coordinate a private jet to pick her up and referencing a copy of Rumler's passport. This trip appears to have fallen through, though, with Rumler writing 2 days later there was, quote, still too much risk in the air. Later that year, a topic of the island actually came up again in messages between the two. After Hurricane Irma damaged the island, Rumler mused about traveling there to help Epstein clean up, writing, you know how much I like physical labor. It's unclear whether Rumler ever visited the island, and she has denied ever going there.
Okay, so what is she saying about these emails then?
So, Aaron, Jennifer Connelly, Rumler's spokesperson, declined to answer some of the detailed questions from CNN, but she told us this, quote, Ms. Rumler has done nothing wrong and has nothing to hide. Nothing in the record suggests otherwise. Jeffrey Epstein was a man of 1,000 faces. Ms. Rumler only saw the one he put on to win people over and gain credibility and acceptance. Her views were shaped by that and his denials of any wrongdoing other than what he had pled guilty to years prior. Ms. Rumler has been clear and consistent from the outset. She knew him through her work as a criminal defense attorney, shared a client with him, received referrals from him, and was friendly in that professional context. At times, Epstein sought informal advice, and she provided feedback based on her understanding at the time without any formal involvement. Ms. Rumler has deep sympathy for those harmed by Epstein, and if she knew then what she knows now, she never would have dealt with him. Aaron?
All right, Andrew Kaczynski from K-File with more incredible reporting on this story. Thank you.
Joining me right now is Gretchen Carlson, the co-founder of Lift Our Voices nonprofit that works to end mechanisms that prevent survivors of sexual assault and harassment from being able to speak out publicly. Has been a very important voice in this conversation through and through. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you.
So you see this, Kathy Rumler announcing this resignation. This is really the first real fallout, I think we could say, or consequence that has happened in the United States from the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. What do you make of that?
What it says to me is that this is all about power, right? And that it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. Power usurps all of that. And especially when you're involved in this level of power. I don't think we should be surprised to see women who are on the Democratic side or otherwise being the people that are going to fall down from this. Now, whether or not she did anything illegal is not what the question here is. The question is that she continued an association with a known child sex trafficker. And she received gifts in return. And, so this is very questionable that somebody should be as high up as she is at Goldman Sachs. It's a huge question of judgment.
That same question goes to so many more people now, right, that is coming out in these files. This is the first and only so far person to face consequences, and not one of the people, though, that is listed in FBI document as a co-conspirator of Epstein's, right? This is that whole thing that Tom Massey and Ro Khanna, they went in, they read through the files, they said they found 6 names that were redacted, that were listed by the FBI as co-conspirators. They went to the floor, they read the names, then they're unredacted. Overseas, and nothing from that. Overseas, you have a prince, an ambassador, senior diplomats, top politicians, all brought down by the Epstein files. All in Europe, not in the United States. I don't know what to do with this.
Well, I think it's completely contingent on this administration. I mean, they have been the ones that have called it a hoax. They have been the ones that have not had any sort of admiration for the survivors and the kind of bravery that it's taken for them to come forward. And you had Pam Bondi giving one of the most despicable performances 2 days ago in front of that House committee, and not even acknowledging the survivors that were standing behind her. That photo is going to go down in infamy with her back to them. So I think if we had a different administration that really wanted to get to the bottom of this, and I should also mention that they never got to the bottom of it in the Biden administration, the Bush administration, the Obama administration.
5 administrations,
but
right?
I think now, we've seen such a change in tenor because the survivors are being believed. This movement continues. It's different than those other administrations. And for the last year, there's been nothing but an apparent cover-up to not get to the bottom. Let's not forget also that Ghislaine Maxwell said in a court document in January that she knew of 25 co-conspirators. And then she came before the House committee and pled the fifth this week and said, I'm not going to tell you who any of them are unless you give me clemency.
Yeah.
So the President of the United States today should say that he's not giving her clemency and that he is not going to pardon her so that she can no longer use that ship.
Goldman Sachs bombshell, top Obama lawyer resigns over Epstein scandal, Uncle Jeffrey emails expose shocking relationship. The first American domino falls, but is this just the beginning? In what marks the first major American casualty from the explosive Jeffrey Epstein files release, Goldman Sachs' chief legal officer, Kathy Ruemmler, has announced her resignation, bringing down one of the most powerful women in corporate America. But as European politicians, princes, and diplomats continue falling like dominoes overseas, a disturbing question emerges. Why is America protecting its elite while the rest of the world pursues justice? The woman who once served as White House counsel to President Barack Obama now finds herself at the center of a scandal that reveals not just questionable judgment, but a pattern of behavior that survivors' advocates are calling despicable, a word usually reserved for the perpetrators. Themselves, not their enablers. Totally tricked out by Uncle Jeffrey, the emails that changed everything. When CNN's K-File team, led by investigative journalist Andrew Kaczynski, began combing through hundreds of emails between Ruemmler and Epstein, they uncovered communications that paint a picture far removed from the purely professional relationship Ruemmler and her team have desperately tried to maintain. The emails reveal a woman who didn't just know Jeffrey Epstein professionally, she called him a friend. She signed emails with XO and Zoxo. She accepted lavish gifts that she described with disturbing enthusiasm, totally tricked out by Uncle Jeffrey today. Jeffrey boots, handbag, and watch. Let that sink in, Uncle Jeffrey. This wasn't a client. This wasn't a professional acquaintance. This was someone she treated like family. Someone she thanked for his friendship even after the world knew what Jeffrey Epstein was. The birthday message that reveals everything. Perhaps no single exchange captures the true nature of this relationship more than the birthday message Ruemmler sent Epstein on his 62nd birthday in 2015. Remember, this is 2015, 7 years after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor. 7 years after the world knew he was a registered sex offender. Ruemmler wrote, "I hope you enjoy the day with your one true love," adding a smiley face. Epstein's response was characteristically vile, a crude reference to masturbation and his own anatomy that we won't fully reproduce here, but involved joking about men naming their penises to avoid making love to a total stranger. Ruemmler's reply? Hard to believe there is still an open question about whether men are the inferior gender. Now, Ruemmler's attorney, Tom Clare, wants us to believe this was her ridiculing Epstein and exiting the exchange. But read those words again. This is banter. This is someone comfortable enough with a convicted sex offender to engage in crude sexual humor via email. This is not horror. This is not disgust. This is not someone cutting ties with a monster. This is someone who remained friendly, perhaps more than friendly, with a man everyone knew preyed on children. Victims' rights, my ass, legal advice for a predator. The professional relationship Ruemmler claims was her only connection to Epstein becomes even more troubling when we examine the legal advice she provided. Advice that seemingly worked against Epstein's victims at every turn. In February 2015, when victims were pursuing a Crimes Victims' Rights Act lawsuit seeking to reopen Epstein's sweetheart plea deal, Ruemmler wrote to Epstein, "I told you that the CVR case is about money." She then added, after inquiring about his legal representation, "Victims' rights, my ass." Let that statement echo in your mind. A woman who would later become chief legal officer of one of the world's most powerful financial institutions was dismissing the rights of sexual abuse victims as nothing more than a cash grab. These weren't abstract legal musings. These were the cries of real women, many who were children when Epstein abused them, seeking justice through the courts. And Kathy Ruemmler was helping their abuser strategize against them. In July 2015, Ruemmler even forwarded Epstein a New York Times article criticizing sex offender registries, writing, "Did you see the New York Times story, Reese application of sex offender registry? Thinking about whether there is an opportunity there." She was actively looking for ways to help Epstein escape the consequences of being listed as a registered sex offender. This wasn't casual advice from a distance. This was strategic legal thinking aimed at rehabilitating a predator's reputation. The island invitation. How close did she really get? Perhaps most chilling are the emails discussing a potential trip to Epstein's infamous private Caribbean island, the location that has become synonymous with his sex trafficking operation. In January 2017, Epstein asked if he could send a plane to pick Ruemmler up in St. Lucia to fly her to the island. Ruemmler's response wasn't horror or refusal. It was logistics. Can we take a day trip to the island on Saturday, or is it too far? A week later, emails show Epstein coordinating a private jet and referencing a copy of Ruemmler's passport. The trip apparently fell through, with Ruemmler writing that there was still too much risk in the air, a phrase that sounds more like operational security than moral concern. Later that year, after Hurricane Irma damaged the island, Ruemmler actually mused about traveling there to help Epstein clean up, writing with apparent humor, "You know how much I like physical labor." Ruemmler has denied ever visiting the island, and it remains unclear if she did, but the willingness, the casual consideration of spending time at a location that survivors have described as the scene of unspeakable crimes speaks volumes about her judgment and priorities. The defense that doesn't defend. Faced with this mountain of evidence, Ruemmler's team has offered what can only be described as a masterclass in corporate damage control that insults the intelligence of every observer. Her spokesperson, Jennifer Connelly, issued a statement that has become a template for the Epstein enabler defense. Miss Ruemmler has done nothing wrong and has nothing to hide. Nothing in the record suggests otherwise. But everything in the record suggests otherwise. The statement continues with the now familiar excuse, Jeffrey Epstein was a man of 1,000 faces. Miss Ruemmler only saw the one he put on to win people over and gain credibility and acceptance. This defense might have worked if Ruemmler had known Epstein before his 2008 conviction. But she didn't. Her relationship with Epstein, according to these very emails, continued and even deepened after he was convicted, after he became a registered sex offender, after the world knew what he was. She didn't see one face that Epstein showed her. She saw his mugshot. She saw his conviction. She saw the news reports. She knew exactly who he was, and she accepted expensive gifts from him, advised him on legal strategy against his victims, and considered vacationing on his private island anyway. Goldman Sachs? Too big to have standards? The response from Goldman Sachs has been equally revealing in its calculated corporate blandness. CEO David Solomon issued a statement that could have been written by an AI trained on crisis management templates. Throughout her tenure, Kathy has been an extraordinary general counsel, and we are grateful for her contributions. I accepted her resignation, and I respect her decision. Notice what's missing. Any acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Any expression of concern about the judgment of their chief legal officer. Any commitment to reviewing how someone with such questionable associations could rise to the highest legal position in their organization. Goldman Sachs is simply letting Ruemmler walk away quietly, with what will undoubtedly be a generous severance package and glowing recommendations that will never mention Jeffrey Epstein. This is how the American elite protect their own. No scandal, no investigation, just a quiet resignation, a press release, and a transition to the next cushy position where these connections and questions will never come up again. Gretchen Carlson. This is all about power. Gretchen Carlson, co-founder of Lift Our Voices, a nonprofit working to end mechanisms that silence survivors of sexual assault and harassment, cut through the corporate speak with brutal clarity when asked about Ruemmler's resignation. What it says to me is that this is all about power. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman or a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. Power usurps all of that. Carlson's observation gets to the heart of what makes the Epstein case so uniquely disturbing. This wasn't just about one predator. It was about a system, a network of powerful people across party lines, across industries, across continents, who either enabled, ignored, or actively protected Epstein's crimes because doing so served their interests. Ruemmler's case is particularly instructive because it demolishes the comforting narrative that only certain types of people could be complicit in Epstein's crimes. Here was a woman, a Democrat, a former White House counsel to Barack Obama, someone who should have been a champion of victims' rights. And yet she wrote victims' rights, my ass, while advising their abuser. As Carlson noted, whether or not she did anything illegal is not what the question here is. The question is that she continued an association with a known child sex trafficker and she received gifts in return. This is very questionable for somebody as high up as she is at Goldman Sachs. It's a huge question of judgment. The American exceptionalism of Epstein impunity. Here's where the story takes its most troubling turn. Kathy Ruemmler is the first and so far only person in the United States to face any consequences from the Epstein files release. Not one of the people listed in FBI documents as co-conspirators has been charged. Not one of the powerful Americans whose names appear throughout the files has resigned from office. Not one has faced professional sanctions. Meanwhile, across Europe, the Epstein files have triggered a political earthquake. Princes, ambassadors, senior diplomats, and top politicians have all been brought down by their connections to Epstein. Investigations have been opened. Careers have ended. Justice, however imperfect, is being pursued. In America, silence, denial, cover up. As Carlson observed, all in Europe, not in the United States. I don't know what to do with this. The contrast is devastating. When Congressman Thomas Massie and Congressman Ro Khanna reviewed the unredacted Epstein files at the Department of Justice, they identified 6 names that were redacted in the public version. 6 people listed by the FBI as co-conspirators in Epstein's sex trafficking operation. They went to the House floor and read those names into the public record. The names were not American officials or celebrities. They were overseas individuals, people who are now facing consequences in their own countries. But what about the American co-conspirators? What about the powerful people in the United States who enabled, participated in, or covered up Epstein's crimes? 5 administrations, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, and now Trump again, and not one has truly pursued justice for Epstein's victims beyond Epstein himself and Ghislaine Maxwell. Pam Bondi's despicable performance, the photo that will live in infamy. The current administration's approach to the Epstein files was crystallized in a single moment 2 days before Ruemmler's resignation. Attorney General Pam Bondi testifying before the House Judiciary Committee with her back. Turned to Epstein survivors who had come to witness her testimony. Gretchen Carlson didn't mince words. You had Pam Bondi giving one of the most despicable performances 2 days ago in front of that House committee and not even acknowledging the survivors that were standing behind her. That photo is going to go down in infamy with her back to them. The symbolism was almost too perfect. America's chief law enforcement officer, the person supposedly pursuing justice for Epstein's victims, literally turned her back on them while refusing to explain why so much of the Epstein files remain redacted. As Carlson noted, the survivors who attended that hearing demonstrated the kind of bravery that it's taken for them to come forward, yet they were met not with respect, compassion, or a commitment to transparency, but with Attorney General Bondi's back. This is how America treats the victims of one of the most prolific sex traffickers in history. This is how seriously the Department of Justice takes the pursuit of justice for crimes against children. Ghislaine Maxwell's ultimatum, 25 names for clemency. Adding another layer to this ongoing scandal, Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's longtime associate and convicted sex trafficker, revealed in court documents that she knows the identities of 25 co-conspirators in Epstein's operation. When called before a House committee this week, Maxwell invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination and made clear that she would only reveal those names in exchange for clemency from President Trump. This is a woman already convicted and serving time for sex trafficking of minors. She's offering to expose 25 other people involved in these crimes, but only if she gets to walk free. As Carlson pointedly noted, the President of the United States today should say that he's not giving her clemency and that he is not going to pardon her so that she can no longer use that chip. But will he? The silence from the White House on this question is deafening, and that silence speaks volumes about how seriously this administration takes accountability for Epstein's co-conspirators. If Maxwell knows 25 names, if the FBI identified multiple co-conspirators in their investigation, if the unredacted files contain evidence of widespread involvement in Epstein's crimes, why has no one beyond Epstein and Maxwell faced justice? The question of judgment versus criminality. Ruemmler's defenders, and she has many in powerful positions, will argue that she has not been accused of any crime. They'll say her relationship with Epstein, however inappropriate it might seem in retrospect, was technically legal. This misses the point entirely. No one is claiming Kathy Ruemmler trafficked children or participated in Epstein's crimes. But that's setting the bar so low that it's essentially underground. The question isn't whether Ruemmler committed a crime. The question is whether someone who maintained a friendly relationship with a convicted sex offender, accepted expensive gifts from that offender, provided legal advice aimed at undermining his victim's lawsuits, dismissed victims' rights as being about money, considered vacationing on the private island where trafficking occurred, actively sought ways to help him escape the consequences of being a registered sex offender, should be the chief legal officer of one of the world's most powerful financial institutions. The question is about judgment, about values, about whose side you're on when power and money conflict with justice and morality. Kathy Ruemmler chose her side. She chose Jeffrey Epstein's side, and she did so knowingly, deliberately, and repeatedly, even after the world knew what he was. The professional relationship that never was. Perhaps the most insulting aspect of Ruemmler's defense is the insistence that her relationship with Epstein was purely professional. Professional relationships don't involve birthday messages about one true love. They don't include emails signed with XO and SOXO. They don't feature acceptance of expensive designer boots, handbags, and watches described as being tricked out by Uncle Jeffrey. Professional relationships don't involve considering vacations to a client's private island. They don't include casual banter about crude sexual jokes. They don't feature expressions of gratitude for friendship. The emails reveal what Ruemmler's defenders want to deny. This was a friendship. This was a personal relationship. This was someone who chose to remain close to Jeffrey Epstein despite knowing exactly who and what he was. And that choice, that willingness to maintain a friendship with a convicted sex offender, to accept his gifts, to advise him against his victims, to laugh at his jokes, that choice disqualifies her from positions of power and trust. The broader pattern, who else is hiding? Ruemmler's case raises an urgent question. How many other powerful people in America maintain similar relationships with Epstein after his 2008 conviction? The flight logs to his private island continued after 2008. The parties at his mansions in New York and Palm Beach continued. The donations to universities and charities continued. The consulting contracts and business relationships continued. Jeffrey Epstein didn't become a pariah after his conviction. He remained integrated into elite circles. He continued to wield influence. He continued to entertain the powerful and the famous. Who else accepted his gifts? Who else provided him with advice? Who else considered his island paradise an acceptable vacation destination despite knowing it was owned by a registered sex offender? If a former White House counsel and Goldman Sachs executive maintained this kind of relationship with Epstein, who else did? What other powerful lawyers, executives, politicians, and celebrities chose to look the other way because Epstein's money, connections, and influence were too valuable to abandon? The Epstein files contain thousands of names. We've seen only a fraction. And if Ruemmler's case is any indication, many of those names belong to people who maintained relationships with Epstein that went far beyond any defensible professional necessity. Why Europe acts while America protects. The contrast between European and American responses to the Epstein scandal illuminates an uncomfortable truth about American power structures. In Europe, when powerful people are implicated in the Epstein files, investigations are opened, positions are resigned, and accountability, however imperfect, is pursued. The system, for all its flaws, responds. In America, the system protects. 5 administrations across both parties have had access to this information. 5 administrations have chosen not to pursue meaningful accountability beyond the bare minimum. Why? The answer lies in what Gretchen Carlson identified: power. The people implicated in the Epstein files are not outsiders to the American power structure. They are the American power structure. They're donors, advisors, executives, politicians, lawyers, and media figures who sit at the center of American elite networks. Pursuing real accountability would mean dismantling those networks. It would mean acknowledging that some of America's most respected institutions, universities, law firms, banks, political parties, were complicit in enabling a sex trafficker because he was wealthy, well-connected, and useful. Europe can pursue accountability because Epstein was an outsider there. His connections were transactions, not relationships that undergird entire power structures. In America, Epstein was inside the tent, and everyone inside that tent knows that if one person falls for their Epstein connections, many more could follow. So they close ranks. They minimize. They claim ignorance they clearly didn't have. They resign quietly with generous packages rather than facing investigations. And the system moves on, protecting its own. The survivors who keep fighting. Amidst all this institutional failure, there's one group that hasn't given up: the survivors themselves. These women, many of them victimized as children, have spent years fighting through a system designed to silence them. They've faced NDAs, threats, dismissal, and ridicule. They've watched as the man who abused them maintained his luxurious lifestyle, his powerful friends, and his social standing even after conviction. They've watched as person after person claimed ignorance, insisted their relationship was professional, or simply denied knowing anything at all. And still they fight. Still they show up at hearings, even when the Attorney General turns her back on them. Still they speak out, even when the powerful want them silent. Still they demand justice, even when 5 administrations refuse to provide it. As Carlson noted, the survivors are being believed. This movement continues. That continuation, that refusal to be silenced, is what eventually forced Kathy Ruemmler's resignation. Not institutional accountability, not Department of Justice action, not political leadership. Survivor activism and investigative journalism forced the first crack in the wall of protection surrounding Epstein's enablers. But it shouldn't take extraordinary courage from traumatized victims and dogged investigation from journalists to achieve even this basic accountability. The system should provide justice. The institutions should pursue wrongdoing. The powerful should face consequences without requiring survivors to fight for years to achieve them. What happens next? Will this be the last domino or the first? Kathy Ruemmler's resignation poses a critical question. Is this the end of American accountability for Epstein enablers, or is it the beginning? If history is any guide, it's the end. One person resigns, the news cycle moves on, and everyone else implicated breathes a sigh of relief that they dodged consequences. But perhaps this time is different. Perhaps the continued pressure from survivors, the ongoing journalism exposing new details, and the growing public anger at elite impunity will force more accountability. The test will come in the following areas. Will Goldman Sachs conduct a real investigation into how Ruemmler's Epstein connections were missed during her hiring and throughout her tenure? Or will they simply move on with a replacement? Will other corporations and institutions review their own leadership to determine if anyone else maintained inappropriate relationships with Epstein after his conviction? Or will they wait until journalists expose them? Will the Department of Justice finally pursue the co-conspirators identified in FBI documents? Or will Ghislaine Maxwell's ultimatum be allowed to stand, creating a hostage situation where justice depends on granting clemency to a convicted sex trafficker? Will President Trump clarify his position on Maxwell's clemency request and commit to never pardoning her or anyone else connected to Epstein's crimes? Or will the ambiguity continue, allowing Maxwell to dangle those 25 names as leverage? Will Congress use its investigative powers to compel testimony from those named in the files? Or will the Pam Bondi hearing be the last serious attempt at oversight? Most importantly, will there be a second resignation? A third? Will the Ruemmler case create precedent for accountability? Or will it be the exception that proves the rule that power protects its own? The verdict: judgment without justice. In announcing her resignation, Kathy Ruemmler becomes the first major American figure to face professional consequences for her association with Jeffrey Epstein. In that sense, her case represents a milestone, proof that accountability is possible even for the powerful. But in every other sense, her case represents failure. Failure of institutions to vet their leadership. Failure of professional organizations to enforce ethical standards. Failure of law enforcement to pursue co-conspirators. Failure of political will to demand real accountability. Most fundamentally, it represents a failure of judgment, not just Ruemmler's personal judgment in befriending a sex offender, but society's collective judgment about who deserves power and who deserves protection. The real scandal isn't that Kathy Ruemmler knew Jeffrey Epstein. The real scandal is that she could maintain that relationship openly, accept his gifts publicly, defend him against his victims, and still rise to the highest legal position at one of the world's most powerful banks. That's not a failure of one person's judgment. That's a systemic failure that tells us something profound about who American institutions serve and protect. The survivors who stood at that hearing, facing Attorney General Bondi's back, deserve better. They deserve an America where knowing a sex trafficker disqualifies you from power, not one where it's treated as an embarrassing detail to be managed by spokesperson statements. They deserve an America where all 25 names Ghislaine Maxwell knows are exposed and prosecuted, not one where she can trade justice for clemency. They deserve an America where Kathy Ruemmler's resignation is the first of many, not the last of one. Whether they get that America remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: the survivors won't stop fighting. And eventually, walls that protect the powerful fall, one resignation at a time. Kathy Ruemmler's resignation marks the end of her tenure at Goldman Sachs, but the beginning of a longer reckoning with how America's elite enabled Jeffrey Epstein. As European heads continue to roll and survivors continue to speak out, the question is no longer whether more accountability will come, but whether it will come before the next generation of victims suffers because we chose to protect power over pursue justice.